Hi and welcome to another watch list, my weekly rundown of what I've been watching, things that are interesting in the world of cinema from a variety of labels and a variety of releases right across the piece. 5 releases this week from 5 labels to get to, and I will start with Eureka, and we'll start with the first in a series of 4 films that has also been released by 88 Films now in the US. It is In the Line of Duty Part 1, or what's called Yes Madam, here, starring Michelle Yeoh, a very young Michelle Yeoh, and Cynthia Rothrock, in what is like an action but very heavily comedic tale of police and crime and all of those kind of things. What is it about? It's sort of broadly about Michelle Yeoh's character as a police kind of detective that is set with taking down a criminal gang where there's been murders committed, police have been killed, revolves around a missing piece of microfilm that the criminals would like to recover, and that not everybody even knows about at the start, but there's like a comedic element with a couple of characters who kind of seem portrays a bit dumb but are a bit smarter than that. And you know, I'd say, if nothing else, Yes Madam is a lot of fun in that kind of modern Hong Kongish style. It's like a caperish film, if you want, with some decent Hong Kong within it. Cynthia Rothrock comes in later on to help out the case, and we sort of have this like female body cop tandem that goes on together that I think really pays off and gives the film and the franchise probably a lot of like nuanced difference from other things that were around that time. Sammo Hung's in on a very minor role, for instance, and you get something that's incredibly playful, but is like non-stop action or non-stop step piece or non-stop fun the whole way through, and something that I think you could definitely waste some quality time with, and I look forward to continuing the series on as I go forward. Next up was one of the recent Indicator releases and one of the Ernst Lubitsch releases. This is Broken Lullaby. And Broken Lullaby I just kind of stuck on, right? It has Lana Barrymore in it, and it kind of tells the story of, you know, a man who turns up at a home who is the home of a person that he met from the opposite side of the war, whose family, he died, and he found a letter just as he was dying. So somebody from the opposite side of the war. Our main character's French. The family that he's going to visit is German, and he wants to deliver this letter to. Except it's not really told to the family about who he is. He just is portrayed as a friend of their son's, who is now missing, well, now dead from the war, and they live sort of vicariously through this Frenchman and the relationship and the stories that he would tell. And it was sort of about halfway through this that I went, I mean, Jesus, this film is nearly identical to what is one of my favourite films of all time. And I couldn't help but run to Wikipedia and run to the internet to see if there was a link. And the film that I'm talking about is Florence by Francois Ozon, which I've talked about, I think, previously on a watch list. That is basically the same story going ahead, except there's some minor and subtle differences. France, it's very unclear at the start. It's not made clear who our main character is. Some of the character names have been changed, and this France goes in another direction on past Broken Lullaby. It kind of takes the story of Broken Lullaby and pushes it even further. And goes more multi-layered, and asks more questions about whether this is right, who's right and who's wrong, and all of that kind of thing. Like, I think France is one of the greatest films that nobody's ever seen in terms of its use of colour, the use of black and white. It's shot in monochrome, a bit like Broken Lullaby as well. But what an absolute treat this turned out to be then, given, well, I've seen France and I kind of know where it goes. I've seen France multiple times, and to see this as its own standalone piece, the inspiration for it, the kind of template for which this further film was made of, and one that, while not really celebrated within Lubitsch's oeuvre of films, kind of derives from a play, then moved on from stage on the screen, etc., and is a release that, in typical Indicator style, is blown out by magnificent extras that explore, you know, obviously similarities between France and this, Actually, as it turns out, well, like, how fantastic was that? Having watched that film, to kind of have an exploration of the differences between it, kind of had it all out and bare, kind of look at the genesis of this film from stage to screen, etc. as well, and the story and the book that accompanied it. It's just another utterly wonderful indicative release, and one that, well, I was glad to say had some tie back to something that I already knew. Taking me on to a Vinegar cinema release, one of those 4K releases. Oh, nice. And this one is Primal Rage. So one that sort of looks like a werewolf film, but isn't really a werewolf film. It's kind of set on a university campus where they're doing research there, and within it trying to look at research into, military research, and to bringing out, extreme violent reactions and harbouring and using that. And it sort of all goes a bit wrong, and everything starts to break down. I mean, I was going to say I'll not really spoil the script, but the script's sort of obvious. It's one that's been sort of done before. And it, as most of those films and around that time goes, it uses that in different ways for like illuminating kills and having a bit of fun with the material that's there, all while in gorgeous 4K. And the film's sort of, it's a good bit of fun. I did enjoy it. So why am I talking about it? Why are you talking about it, Chris? Well, there's a couple of things I want to point out. One, it's one of those films where they have obviously licensed one song and they use it multiple times through it, so it keeps on repeating. So the same song repeats again and again, which I think is fun to even point out. But this release contains a making of documentary that is pretty much the exact same length as the film itself, and the making of documentary is absolutely terrific. It's an absolutely wonderful look and breakdown, and it has all of the people that were pretty much involved in the making of the film at various stages, much later in life, and it brings to mind some of the things that I really love about this hobby of ours. Why some people say, well, what's the point in doing a 4K release of Primal Rage? Like, it's a so-so movie. Did you see the glint of the of them bossing there? Oh, summit. Anyway, slipcovers are wonderful. But this hobby of ours, which has so-so movies, but you can elevate it by doing something incredible with the extras, like a full 1.5 hour making of documentary that I would say is better than the film itself, but you need to watch the film for context. I think that's something worth shouting about. I think it's something worth talking about, and something that even if you can't get this lovely embossed slipcover with the teeth that stick out, underrated. The documentary itself's well worth picking up. Bringing me to another label that very much maligned, well, maligned being the wrong word, but very much under talked about, and that is StudioCanal's Vintage Classics line. And I think one of the real classics from their line is Dead of Night, which has Michael Redgrave here in the front as the puppeteer. And Dead of Night is like an anthology horror story collection, and one that sort of shouldn't work in its own right. It kind of tells a story of people all gathering in the house, and then each of them sharing kind of creepy stories from their past. But each one is well told. Each one has its own flavour. Each one kind of melds itself together to make it an even greater whole. And you end up with a film that kind of uses a lot of talents of a lot of great people and a lot of great actors, and that kind of creepy, like, ghost story. Like, by modern standards, none of them are scary, but I think it'd be a great kind of alternative Halloweenish kind of film if you were to come ahead and watch it. It also has an outstanding extra in it, which is what's it actually called? Remembering Dead of Night. It's 75 minutes long. On this now, what I'll tell you is it's available on the StudioCanal YouTube channel for free. So if you want to just watch that, you can watch it there. But it's also contained in the disc here to give it some meaning and give it some depth in the release. Vintage Classics line often have a interview or one other featurette with it, and usually very good, usually starring Matthew Sweet, who's excellent. But this one is something a bit special and a bit extra, and one that I very much recommend. Which brings me on to my last release, and this one's spine number 1 from a label which has only ever had one release as far as I can see so far, and it's from Mawu Films, who purport to want to release films from South America, which I'm very much in favour of and would like to support. So I picked this up. This is part one of Radiance's sub-labels, but this is actually going back, this may be in September or something, previous year. This has been around for a very long time. This is Man Marked for Death 20 years later, and it's a Brazilian film, and it's a documentary film. Now, how do you set up Man Marked for Death 20 years later? So they made a film called Man Marked for Death, or made the starting of a film called Man Marked for Death, of a guy who was a union leader who was killed in, like, I say small village, but it seems to be a bit more than that because it gained more notoriety than that. And they took a lot of the people that were in the union, his wife, and started to stage the shootings of a film, you know, chronicling his death, why he was killed, all of that kind of stuff. And you think, that's okay. But then the camera and the film, etc., was confiscated by the people that had obviously killed him, the government, trying to shut down this story. And the filmmaker comes back to it many, many years later to revisit and talk to the people and find the people who were involved around that time, see if they still are living, see if they still live in the area, to see if the conditions which existed around that time still exist. And oh my god, this is incredible. Like, to see some of the original footage of the film, to tell the story of why it was gotten rid of, the kind of propaganda that kind of went along with, you know, trying to disavow and kind of say, actually, this is why this man was killed back in that time, how ridiculous, and how that still haunts and still was prevalent 20 years later when they went to investigate it. The openness with which people talk about it, and actually how afraid they still are to talk about it, is, you really feel that through the screen, and something that I think is incredibly powerful. What a film to watch. Something that I wasn't aware of, and something that I was really surprised when I went to look at it as well, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed, and one I heartily recommend to people here if you haven't seen it or haven't heard anybody talk about, like I hadn't heard anybody talk about. Kind of the point of the watch list, and kind of the point of why I do these videos in the first place, is to watch something good and go, oh, here, I may find 4 other films to talk about with this, because this needs represented in some way. So that's Man Marked for Death 20 years later. I heartily recommend, as usual, and one that I think you should all check out. That's my watch list for this week. I hope you find something worth watching in there. If you've seen any of these, please let me know. If you've got something really interesting that you've seen yourself, please let me know in the comments, and I'll speak to you soon on the channel. Take care. All the best.